I'm paying over 70% of my salary at the moment before I even look at buying food. Where do I get the money to go buy a house? Like, it's impossible.
The housing affordability crisis, especially for OECD nations, feels like a universal experience at this point.
Housing crisis.
Housing crisis.
Housing crisis.
Housing.
But technically, it isn't the same. From the US to Germany, Canada to Australia, Italy to whatever's going over down here in Portugal. We'll get to that. In today's video, I'm breaking down one of the simplest and yet most powerful ways to compare housing affordability around the world: the price-to-income ratio. And we'll tackle the question, what's really causing this housing affordability crisis? So, let's take a look. The OECD's price-to-income ratio, which is what I'm using as a point of comparison for this video, measures housing affordability by dividing nominal house prices by net household disposable income per capita. Net household disposable income per capita reflects the money that's left over after taxes and transfers to show the average spending available among citizens in a country. For a bit of perspective here, US net household disposable income per capita is $66,155 a year based on the OECD's latest reading. So just to be clear, according to the OECD, income includes wages and salaries, income from pensions and other social benefits, and income from financial investments. And then subtracted from that income would be taxes, Social Security contributions, interest on financial liabilities, and social transfers, which include health or education provided for free or at reduced prices by governments. However, it's important that I include a footnote to the data that I'm presenting to you today. The disposable income given for the US, as reported by the OECD and the System of National Accounts, is, in my opinion, not weighed very evenly. In most of the countries examined, healthcare costs are already included as those transfers. So too are pension and nursing insurance, and most of higher education costs are included or heavily subsidized, but not in the United States. Yes, contributions to Social Security are included here, but the old age provision of Social Security in the US relative to the cost of living is less than the state pensions in other European nations. And as such, most Americans have to have some other kind of capital investment so as not to be destitute in their retirement years. Also, 59% of Americans cannot cover a $1,000 emergency expense with savings as of early 2025. So yeah, the numbers in the US look better than they are, in my opinion. But accurately weighing an aggregate for all of those benefits is just simply not possible. So anyway, I digress. For the analysis in this video, the prices are indexed to 2015. This means that a country with a score of 100% has seen prices of housing remain stable relative to net household disposable income in the past 10 years. Whereas, for example, countries like the United States with a value of 127 have seen an almost 30% increase in this ratio over that same period of time. More often than not, if your country is in the red zone, this is an indicator that the price of housing is outpacing the rise in wages, contributing to what we term a housing affordability crisis. But, technically speaking, a rise in this ratio could also indicate that housing prices are stable, but for some reason, disposable income has shrunk. Or a drop in this ratio could mean that the housing market is in free fall. So, without further ado, let's see how this metric compares globally, shall we? Across the OECD, one of the most affordable market relative to wages can be found in the Nordic country of Finland. And this is primarily because, although Finland sits in the middle of OECD nations when it comes to household net disposable income per capita, they have a pretty high housing supply, strong state-subsidized social housing, and the prices of housing have actually fallen here in recent years. At present, house prices and disposable income are in the same situation as at the end of the 1990s, when the country was in a recession. Now, of course, with every single country we are going to be discussing today, there will be strong regional differences. There are small towns in rural Finland where no one really wants to buy a house, even with big discounts. It's problematic for the owners if they can't get rid of the place but still have to pay property tax. While at the same time, in Tampere and Turku, for example, house prices have seen more dramatic increases as well as decreases in recent decades. In the capital region of Helsinki, prices have risen to levels that are unattainable for many low and middle-income earners. However, when you look across sister cities in the Nordic region, the housing market in Helsinki is still more affordable relative to wages. Tallinn, Estonia is actually a really fascinating example of a classic low-income trap market. Tallinn is the least affordable city for this price-to-wage comparison, which I imagine might surprise many of you. It is fairly common knowledge that Scandinavian countries of Sweden, Norway, and Denmark are expensive. And yeah, it's true. But cheaper homes do not necessarily equal affordable housing. Despite lower absolute home prices, incomes for Estonians are much lower, pushing the ratio highest amongst all of the nations in this region. It's actually one of the reasons why estimates suggest that around 5% of the Estonian working age population have jobs in Finland, with a significant portion commuting from Tallinn to Helsinki. To reframe this in another way, the median home costs about 7 times the annual disposable income per person in Helsinki, but over 11 times that in Tallinn. Isn't it interesting that while the housing affordability crisis seems universal, the causes behind it and the strategies to address it are highly varied from one location to another. But understanding how governments are tackling this issue and getting unbiased, reliable reporting on how things are progressing is easier said than done. That's why I always use our sponsor, Ground News, because it gives me an easy, data-driven, and objective way to read the news. On Ground News, every story comes with a quick visual breakdown of political bias, factuality, and the ownership of sources reporting, all backed by ratings from 3 independent news monitoring organizations. And recent reporting on the structural issues around affordable housing construction in the United States highlights not just how politicized government policies have become, but how millions are missing out on important developments in their own communities because of politics. For example, this recent story on the Build America, Buy America Act, signed by President Joe Biden in 2021, covers how affordable housing projects are stalling nationwide as developers struggle to verify materials that carry the required Made in the USA label, and was covered by over 40 news outlets. A left-leaning outlet explores this important topic by explaining that the real problem isn't the law, but rather that the process itself has been at a near standstill as the Department of Housing and Urban Development, which has had its staff slashed by the Trump administration, has only greenlit a handful of projects. But here's where things get even more interesting. Despite the fact that the political right has platformed Made in America and American manufacturing, surprisingly, not a single right-leaning news outlet covered this story. It was nowhere to be found. If one side of the political spectrum is ignoring a story, just like this, the blind spot feed will let you know so you can make up your own mind about how reliable the reporting is, which is a level of transparency that I very much appreciate when I'm sifting through the data and reports on every subject I cover here on my channel. So go head over to ground.news/Ashton to check it out, or click the link down below in the description of this video. Take Australia as our next example. With a score of 121, while not the worst on the list, things are not faring very well either. But the housing affordability situation in Australia is unique in comparison to other nations around the globe. Simply put, Australia has not been building enough homes to meet the demands of its rapidly growing population, creating a scarcity that makes any available house more expensive to buy or rent. Compounding the issue are Australia's restrictive planning laws, which prevent homes from being built where most people want to live, such as in major cities. Popular metropolitan areas like Melbourne and Sydney are far less dense than comparably sized cities around the world. In fact, Melbourne, Australia's largest urban area geographically, has a population just over 4 million. This means that a city, which occupies the 32nd largest area in the world, making it larger than London, which is home to 10.4 million people, and Mexico City, with 20.4 million residents. On top of that, another Australian city, Sydney, is currently the second least affordable city in the world to buy a property, according to a 2023 Demographia International Housing Affordability Survey. The latest data from property analytics company Domain shows that the median Sydney home costs almost 1.76 million Australian dollars. That comes out to just shy of 1.1 million euros, roughly 930,000 British pounds, or just over 1.2 million US dollars for reference. And house prices in Brisbane, Perth, and Adelaide have also doubled since 2019, and those cities are now also all listed amongst the top handful of least affordable cities around the globe. Nationwide, house prices in Australia have jumped roughly 40% in the last 5 years, a kind of growth that traditionally has only occurred over the course of a decade. And wages just have simply failed to keep up. This hyper acceleration of housing appreciation is kind of similar to what's going on in Canada and the US, by the way, countries which have also seen 40 and 50% increases respectively. Now, I want to get ahead of some misinformation, so please note that immigration and foreign property purchases are often cited as causes for Australia's housing crisis, but numerous experts say that they are not significant contributors statistically. Truly, the real culprit for Australia is a severe long-term shortage of housing supply paired with high demand. They aren't building enough housing units to meet the needs of the housing market. Now, I think an interesting conversation to be had here is that if we think optimistically, likely not realistically, but optimistically, that Australia will achieve what it set out to do, which, per the Australian federal government, is a target of 1.2 million new homes by 2029, will home prices actually drop? Probably not. While yeah, a shortage is what predominantly caused this problem, reversing it isn't going to fix it at this point. And here, Canada and the United States are appropriate examples. The supply shortage argument basically says this: increasing housing supply is the key to restoring affordability. But if the argument is correct, then we should expect to see the evidence that increases in the number of dwellings per capita lowers prices over time. But historical data shows us the opposite. Take a look at this. Over the past half-century, dwellings per capita have risen significantly in Canada, meaning, generally speaking, the housing shortage has gotten better, not worse. Yet, nonetheless, price has risen too, along with household debt. The real culprit? Well, global capital markets and financial excess. Listen, this is honestly a rabbit hole that I could spend hours going into, but privatizing public goods has almost never resulted in lower prices for consumers. Ever. There's a reason private healthcare is more expensive than public ones. There's a reason private schools are more expensive than public ones. Same with private prisons, private mail services, private roads. Stop. See, there's the rabbit hole. The reality is that in private markets, new supply only emerges when prices rise, and developers feel reassured that they can earn a profit on their investment. Price and supply both move up together over time, with increased supply not necessarily pushing prices down. Now, this doesn't mean that we shouldn't build more. We need to build more. But we also need to be tackling this price to wage ratio from both sides. Not just the price of houses, which likely means government subsidies, but stagnating wages too. So let's switch gears here. On the very tippity top of the spectrum is Portugal. And if you aren't from the region, you might be wondering what the heck is going on to make affordability so particularly bad there. In fact, it has had the sharpest rise across all OECD countries at 67%. So again, what happened here? Well, this ratio, price to income, can rise for two reasons. Prices for housing goes up, or incomes can go down. Unfortunately for Portugal, it's both at the same time. Across the country, but especially in metropolitan areas surrounding Lisbon, prices are climbing, rents are rising, and the gap between regions is widening. Between 2020 and 2021, home prices there shot up 157% alone. Now, context is important here. Portugal has a lot of houses on the market, and rents and property prices are still relatively cheap compared to other countries. However, incomes in Portugal are low. According to the OECD, Portugal has the sixth lowest average gross annual salary amongst OECD countries, with most high-paying jobs located in the major city centers, where property is more expensive. It's difficult for Portuguese people, especially young adults, to afford to rent or buy a home. For many households, especially first-time buyers, the market feels increasingly detached from local incomes. So what's driving prices to be so much higher in metro areas? Well, a big part of this is just institutional investment. According to the European Commission's report, in some urban areas, part of the housing stock is owned by companies, and the long period of low interest rates has contributed to increasing demand from institutional investors. The report also states that institutional investors, such as insurance companies and pension funds, have played an important role in the rise of property prices over the last decade, particularly in global capitals. In Portugal, pension funds have what they term significant exposure. And unfortunately, another big factor is gentrification. The state absorbed the cost of redevelopment, thus ensuring that private capital could extract profits from rehabilitation, and allowed developers to build the most profitable product with pretty much no limitations, which to a great extent are short-term rentals, hotels, and luxury housing for transnational users. It's also worth mentioning that the proportion of public housing in Portugal is one of the lowest in all of Europe. Residential properties owned, managed, or subsidized by the government or local authorities represents only around 2% of the total stock. Unsurprisingly, thousands of Portuguese citizens have protested about affordability amid a shortage of housing supply and an influx of wealthy foreigners moving into the country. After all of these discussions about extremes, especially when it comes to the price of housing, I thought it would be interesting to look at the other end of this spectrum, at a place that on this map shows a decrease in this price-to-income ratio over the past decade, and explore what's happening there. Italy. According to the OECD data, Italy has seen a 13% reduction in its housing price-to-income ratio since 2015, meaning that housing prices here have gotten more affordable relative to wages over the past 10 years. But it isn't exactly a reason to celebrate. Unlike many other European countries that experienced a housing boom post-2015, Italy's market continued to experience a sluggish recovery, particularly for existing homes following the 2011-2014 debt crisis. House prices saw a cumulative decline of 4.9%. This trend of falling nominal prices, especially for non-renovated or older homes, reduced the price-to-income ratio. But to really tell the story of Italy, I'd like to introduce you to one final map. What you see here is the European project House for All, developed within the ESPON research framework, which analyzed around 22 million property listings across Europe, cross-referencing them with average disposable income at municipal levels. Not national averages, not perceptions, granular data, territory by territory, finally allowing us to understand how sustainable it really is. Now remember, affordability does not mean whether a house is expensive or cheap in absolute terms. It's just simply how much that house weighs against the income of the people who live there. It's a relationship, not a number. And it's this relationship that overturns many assumptions. Take Cortina d'Ampezzo, for example. Extremely high prices, among the highest in Italy. In common narratives, a completely inaccessible place. And yet, if you look at the relationship between prices and the incomes of the people who actually buy and live in that market, the situation is less extreme than it appears. Again, not because houses are cheap, clearly they're not, but because the market aligns with a very high income bracket. On the other hand, regions like Tuscany, often perceived as mid-range, show a much more problematic dynamic. Strong prices driven by international and tourist demand, but low local incomes that simply do not keep up. And that's where affordability truly starts to break down. While house prices have remained relatively low or stable, Italian household incomes have not significantly, and in many cases remained stagnant or declined, resulting in a low ability to build wealth. And I know that the data that I present in this video are indexed to 2015 to give a decade snapshot, but this is a problem that's been brewing for much, much longer in Italy. Italian incomes have experienced significant long-term stagnation, with real wages showing virtually no growth for decades, making Italy a notable outlier in Europe. Between 1990 and 2000, Italy was the only country in the EU where real wages actually declined, falling by approximately 3%. So when you tack on high unemployment and economic uncertainty, particularly in certain regions, the result is reduced purchasing power. Young people and first-time buyers in particular face limited access to credit and slowing demand. Now, no two countries or regions within a country are alike, but broadly speaking, housing affordability is a double-sided issue. On the one hand, we see general issues surrounding housing shortages. And again, this is not just an absolute number, but building the right kind of housing where people want to live. But we also are largely experiencing wages that aren't keeping pace with the rising cost of living, an aspect that many governments are seeming to ignore. The strategy that many governments present for tackling the housing affordability crisis is to try to encourage the supply side issue. But the housing problem will persist if we continue to simply look at averages and call for more affordable housing to be built. Instead, we should be looking at the factors driving the affordability problem for those who are the most affected. The affordability crisis is really a wage crisis, and I just don't think we're talking about this enough. But I'd love to hear your thoughts down below in the comment section of this video, and let me know what housing affordability looks like in your neck of the woods, and what do you think the biggest drivers of price to income are in your area. And as always, if you enjoyed what you saw today, be sure to hit that thumbs up button. And for more content from Type Ashton, hit that subscribe button. So, I'll see you next time. Cheers!